Anybody still awake? I hope so. I hope so. A few years back, when me and Pam started dating, there was a snow event in Richmond at the time, and we went over to the apartment where they were, and me and Silas was young, he was probably 8 or 9, were outside having a snowball fight, throwing snowballs at each other. And this young man, probably about 4, actually he was 5, came up and asked if he could play, if he could join us. And I said, sure, you know, and he started throwing at Silas with me, and Silas was throwing back, and we started talking, and I said, well, what's your name? And he told me his name, I believe it was John. He said, you know, I said, well, my name's Ken. And I said, how old are you? And he said, I'm 5. And I said, well, so am I. And to which he looked at me and he said, how'd you get so big? And I wonder how, if that's what David thought when he walked into that valley and he looked at Goliath. How did you get so big? And I wonder, as we look at the giants in our life, the problems in our life, sometimes we have to think too, how did you get so big? You started off so small, and yet here you are, this mammoth problem in my life, and how am I going to deal with you, right? Because those are the challenges of life, right? And challenges are what make life interesting, right? But it's conquering that makes it meaningful. Are giants real? Sure they are. Certainly they are. They come at us in all shapes and forms. Persecution, pain, problems. They confront us every day. There's nothing fake about problems, giants. There's nothing made up. It's not something you dreamed up that you just imagined that there's this giant. Giants are real. And each and every one of us at some time faces a giant. Right? But what defines a giant? What makes it a giant? A giant is something that keeps us from God. That distracts us from being or having what God would have us to be. And it comes in many shapes and sizes. It can be things such as fear or worry, persecution, pain, prejudice, unforgiveness, addictions. Our giants come in many shapes and forms, and they come to each of us in our own special way. And one thing for sure is that if you haven't faced a giant, probably at some point in your life you will. And maybe the giant's there, but you haven't seen it. Maybe you're choosing just not to recognize it. Maybe there's this thing in your life that's keeping you from moving forward. You know, as we look at today's story, we see David has come on the scene. And there is this Philistine who comes out and is challenging the whole army of Israel. Just send someone. Come on. Here I am. Anyone? Anyone at all? I mean, he's a smack talker and pretty confident. Right? Yeah. Come on. One hand behind my back. Anybody. I'll take you. Just send somebody. And David comes and says, what is going on? You know, what is going on with this? Why is nobody taking this guy on? And he goes to see Saul, and you just heard the story twice. I told them. And what happens? He ends up killing Goliath, right? But it's more than just a kid's story about the guy who's a good shot with a slingshot. You know, it relates to us today, in that we face our giants too. We all have giants in front of us, and we all have to face them. And so there's some lessons to learn just from looking at the story about David. I mean, I think the things that we have to recognize is that it took 3 parts. So first thing he had to do was he had to confront his giant. Right? And the second thing was David challenged the giant. The third thing was he conquered the giant. And all that took courage every step of the way. It takes courage, and it took great faith. It took great faith. We see in David the very first thing he does is he what? He confronts the giant. He recognizes that there's a problem. So many of us will go through life and we won't recognize that there's a problem. We don't look for it. You know, what's keeping me from being a better Christian? What's keeping me from getting to where God wants me to go? You know, those lands were Israel's lands, the Israelites' land. And the Philistines were keeping them from that, thus David keeping them from, Goliath, get the story right. Goliath keeping them from having what God would have them to have. Something needed to change. Goliath needed to go. And David recognized it. And he confronted it. How many of us don't confront our giants? Don't recognize the giants in our lives? Because we all have them. What is it that's keeping you from having what God would have you have? From being the person that God would have you to be? From taking that next step? From moving forward in your Christianity? It can be a lot of things. It can come in the form of a lot of things. It can come in the form of shame. Maybe for something you did years ago. It can come in the form of unforgiveness, where you're just not able to let go of something that was done to you years ago. And it's holding you back. You may be struggling with a difficult finances in this economy. You may be struggling with marriage difficulties. There are all kinds of giants, and they all seem very big, right? And so, like the rest of the Israelites, they was, you know, when Goliath would come out and call them out, because he'd been doing this for about 40 days, I think. But when he would come out and call them out, you know, what did they do? Yeah, let's go play some cards. Anybody got the cards? Let's go roll it. They weren't going. Nobody was stepping up. Nobody was going to confront this giant. But he needed to be confronted. You know, it's that elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about, right? But he needed to be confronted. And David confronted him. David was the one who said, yeah, this can't go on. You don't need to be afraid of this guy. I'll take this guy out. He's just a boy. But I'll take this guy out. We have to learn to confront our giants. We have to recognize what they are. We have to search for them. Sometimes they're very big. And we turn away. We don't want to see them. We don't want to know they're there. We just, you know, if I don't look at it, it'll go away. Very rarely do giants just go away. Okay? So we need to, learn to confront our giants. Learn to recognize them. What's the next thing we have to learn to do? Just recognizing that it's there doesn't solve it. Everybody saw the giant come every day. Not everybody would recognize it and say they wanted to do something about it. David did. But David took it to the next step. So I'll take him out. I'm willing to challenge him. I'm willing to step up and take this guy out. Are you willing to step up and take out your giant? I mean, there's all kinds of excuses not to. There's always an excuse, right? And everybody good I'm good at excuses. I can come up with them all the time. All day long. We can always find a reason not to step up, right? I'm busy, I got carpool, got to have my nails did. I mean, there's always something. There's always some reason not to step up. And sometimes, your friends even help you out. You know, they'll get you an excuse. Oh, you don't want to do that. You know, come on. Let's go do something else. You don't want to take care of that. You don't want to deal with that. You know, your friends will make excuses for you. You know, Saul was making excuses for David. You can't fight this guy. You're too young. You're too little. You're just a young boy. He's a big man. You're going to get wiped out. You can't do this. Saul was making excuses for David. But David wasn't having any of that. David had a lot of faith and a lot of courage. And he was ready to step up. And he said, no. No excuses today. And what did he do? Did you catch that? When Saul tried to make excuses for him, what did he do? He recounted his history. Right? You see, because David didn't just have faith because he had faith. David had a history with God. David had small skirmishes, or big, it would be big for me, but I guess he didn't count them as that, with bears and lions. And God had carried him through those battles and made him victorious. Any of y'all ever wrestled a bear or a lion? Any bear wrestlers? No, well, I imagine that's a pretty tough wrestling match. I mean, 2 out of 3, you might, anyway. But what I'm saying is, he had some small skirmishes in his life. Anybody here ever had any small skirmishes in your life? How about that? Any of y'all face some smaller problems? Maybe some smaller challenges that God's got you through? You developing a history with God? You see, that's what we have to, when we get these giants before us, we have to draw back on those small histories. Those little hills and valleys. I always look at life as a journey. And in that journey, you're going to have some hills and some small valleys, and sometimes you can have cliffs. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you're going to encounter, right? But when you go through those small valleys, it's God who carries you through those. When you go through those small challenges, that you learn to lean on God. When you learn to give God your problems. We talked about that before. When we really give God, remember we talked about that last year when we talked about giving God your problems, not just say, here God, have it, and then holding on to it, saying, just in case you drop it, God, I got it, and not that. We're not talking about that kind of giving. We're talking about, here you go, God, and it's yours, and walking away. That's the kind of faith we have to have. So we know you, God, that you're with us, and that you're not going to ever leave us, and you're not ever going to fail us, and I know I've given you that problem, and it's yours. And when you start leaning on God in that way, you're going to experience some things you've never, ever, ever experienced in your life. You're going to come to realize how strong and how big your God is. Goliath is big. God is bigger. We worship a big God, a huge God. And we have to learn to lean on God in those little valleys. So one day, when we have to step into the valley against a giant, we're very well equipped. We're very confident that we can take out this giant. Why? Because we have a history. We have a history with God. We've leaned on Him during the smaller things, and with each step it gets bigger and bigger, and you come to know God in all kinds of new ways that you've never even dreamed of before. You have to do your part, but you have to count on God to do His part. And through that, we become conquerors. David wasn't afraid. He didn't run away, but the story tells us he did what? He ran towards Goliath. And that was a big man. I think it said 9 feet 9 inches tall. I can't even reach that. That's a big man. They say his armor weighed anywhere from 125 to 215 pounds. Just his armor. That's more than some people in this room. Not me, but some people. That's a big man to carry all that around, right? But David wasn't afraid. He didn't go to Saul and say, "Look, I got this time machine. I went forward, and I got me this gun. I know you don't know what a gun is, but trust me, it's powerful, and I can take out this giant." He wasn't counting on any of that. He didn't say, "Hey, I'm wired. He won't get me. He won't be able to lay a glove on me." No. Who did he say was going to defeat Goliath? God. He counted on God too. He didn't need all that fancy armor. He just took the basics with him. So, when we bring the basics to the battle, when we bring ourselves and our commitment and our faith and our courage, God does the rest. He'll carry us through the battle. He'll deliver the Goliath to us. But we got to show up. We have to confront our giants. We have to challenge those things that keep us from having what God would have us to have. Do you have a giant in your life? Don't identify here in church. Do you have a giant in your life? We all have things that keep us from being what God would have us to be. Sometimes I have back pain, and some days that's a giant for me. That's a big deal. It really is. But I know God will get me through it. I know it. Why? We got history. We have a relationship. He has carried me through so many battles. But I know He is always with me. There is no doubt in my mind. Not a shred of doubt. Because we have history. Do you have history? It's never, when do you start building history? You can start today if you don't have history. History is everything that's behind you. Right? And we need to draw on it. But He conquered. The final thing is that David conquered. He won. He was victorious, right? He not only killed him, he went and cut his head off. He made sure he wasn't coming back. I mean, he wasn't no doubt in that young man. It was gone. He killed him and he went and cut his head off. And we face our giants. That's what we need to do. Not only defeat them, but just wipe them out. We need to understand that fear has no place in our life if we're people of faith. That God ultimately has the final word. But that that's in the world is not stronger than that which is in you. That we worship a big God. A God bigger than any giant. 9 foot, 10 foot, 11 foot. I don't care. God's bigger. He's bigger than all that. Is your God that big? Or your God fit in a little box and keep on the dresser? Take God out of that box. He doesn't like walls. Alright, let Him go. Discover the wonderful things that He can do for you, and will do for you, and wants to do for you, and has already done for you. It's there. And you know, when David defeated Goliath, Saul started wondering what was so different about David. Yeah. That's not this story, but we'll see that in weeks ahead or in the story ahead. If you read ahead, Saul started wondering, well, something's not right. You know, he's a real threat. You know, when we start confronting our giants and challenging our giants, people are going to look at us and say, what's going on with them? They're going to look at us different too. It gives us a chance to show people what our God is all about. Because you can do all things through God. The Bible tells us I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That should be your motto. You should say that every day before you go out and conquer the world. There are no giants bigger than our God. He will deliver us from our giants. But we have to do our part. Right? We have to stand up. We need to confront. We need to challenge. And we need to conquer. There are a lot of giants out there waiting to be conquered. And yeah, they look big. And you know, I've had times in my life where I looked across the room and that's a big man. And I'm sure to that 5-year-old boy, I was the biggest 5-year-old he had ever seen. And the question of how did you get so big is prevalent in all our lives. Because we all have those type of problems. How did you get so big? You just start off with a small thing and here it's blossomed, this thing that controls my life. Well, I'm here to tell you it doesn't have control of your life anymore. It does not. You just need to confront it and pray with God and work on it and challenge it. Conquer it. How'd you get so big? That's the question we ought to ask God. How did you get so big? Amen?
Amen.